Hello and welcome to Unseen Podcast number 70. This is a breakout from the WOW podcast. I don't have the full script here, but here we go. So I want to welcome a number of people here. We're going to talk today about science fiction movies, particularly the treatment of science and the study of society in such movies. And I have here with me Buckfield.
Hello.
Nick Nielsen.
Hello, David, and hello to the Unseen Podcast.
And I have Paul Carr, who's normally doing this and does a much better job than me.
Thanks, David, for filling in for me. And I'm just here to listen to you smart people talk about movies.
Okay. And I believe Patrick Festa will be joining us soon when he gets his audio system going correctly. So, Nick Nielsen has had some very interesting thoughts about the treatment of the science fiction movies and how they let us look at the future and also let us look at society today. Would you agree, Nick, that one of the functions of science fiction really is to hold up a mirror to our own societies, and by twisting the mirror a bit or distorting the mirror a bit, we get to see how our own societies may have flaws or how they may change. Would you agree with that sort of approach?
Yes, I would agree, and I would say that the way, there is one specific way in particular in which the mirror is twisted to give us a new perspective on the familiar. I think what the Russian formalists would have called defamiliarization is what I call diachronic extrapolation, which is to take one aspect from contemporary society, one thing from the world that we know, and extrapolate it without extrapolating everything else at the same time. So it becomes a thought experiment when you take, you hold everything else constant and you take one variable and you change, or maybe, two or three variables and change them and see what happens, basically.
So it's really, to make it simple, it's the if this goes on approach, isn't it? If this particular trend continues into the future, then this may be the result. And it's by focusing on one thing, we may get a dystopian future, or we may get something which throws light on other aspects of our society. I'm thinking of things like, in fact, I'm just reading at the moment Margaret Atwood's book, The Handmaid's Tale, which, as far as I can see, is the extrapolation of the trend of very paternalistic, male-driven societies and the treatment of women more and more as objects. There seems to be the trend of that. And I believe The Handmaid's Tale is about to become a TV series in Canada.
It has been made into a film once, and I did hear it's going to be produced again.
It's a TV series, I think, that they're making. So not just a one-off movie. I think it's a series that they're about to do. But to take the point, if we take that one trend of the very theocratic societies, the increasing fundamentalist, Christian fundamentalist, anti-woman trend, that's kind of what the Handmaid's Tale does. And I suppose if you look at a book or a film like 1984, where taking Orwell was really sort of taking the trends of what he saw happening in British society just after the Second World War, and extrapolating those into the future and seeing what a society might be like. Would you? And
agree? Also consciously holding up what the Soviet Union was doing in the time in terms of rewriting history and making everything in society follow the dictates of the Communist Party.
Sure, but I think there must have been trends in British society that he saw happening as well.
Definitely, with INGSOC, English socialism, being one of the protagonists. Yeah. I think another interesting thing, since we're specifically talking about science fiction film, is the way that society, in a way that is distinct from the way that novels reflect society. You know, as a science fiction writer, you will be very familiar with the process of writing, which can be very isolating and very individual. And as a person can, a starving artist can be in the attic garret of some place and write a novel, and yeah, it can influence, you know, millions of people if millions of people read it and like it. But a film production, like a theater production, or like any big, or like a piece of architecture, I often compare the two, is a social work. Many people act in it. Many people produce it. Many people make the costumes. The script is almost always changed in the course of its filming, and so it reflects, as it were, the zeitgeist to a much greater extent than a novel, because you've got the contributions of many people involved.
Yeah, and each of them may have their own spin on it and make a. I mean, it comes down to how the director interprets what the script writer has written, what the actors, how the actors interpret that, and interpret what the director's saying. So there are all these different influences. I'm sure that's right. I did start off by saying that we were going to look at the treatment of science in science fiction movies. Is that an issue worth pursuing? I suppose really a lot of science fiction movies are set in the future. Not all of them. A lot of them are set in the future, and those perhaps involve extrapolations of current scientific thinking. A lot of science fiction is about, well, if this technological development keeps going or is taken to an extreme, then what is life going to be like? So I guess that's where the movies that feature AI or robotics come from. Is we're already starting to see reasonably clever computers and a lot of robotics, but if we take that to the extreme, what does that end up with? I haven't seen a lot of the more recent movies. The most recent movie I saw that had that sort of theme was Ex Machina, which I thought was pretty good actually. But there are also other movies we can think of in that sort of trend.
I did not get to see Ex Machina, but I did see Her. And Sam Lichtenstein, in the comments thread before this episode, mentioned a whole series of AI-related films, first coming in One Pulse in the 90s with RoboCop and a few others, and then the more recent crop with Ex Machina and Her and several others. I guess there was
Blade Runner.
Blade Runner, that's an 80s film, so...
But
was RoboCop on 90s?
I don't remember. I'd have to look it up.
It probably would have been about then, yeah. The thing about Blade Runner, of course, is it's the idea of the artificial human, which I suppose is the thought of Ex Machina too, in a way. But in Ex Machina, at least, the robot is explicitly and obviously visually and audibly a robot, whereas in Blade Runner, the replicants are indistinguishable from humans, and indeed there's a great deal of debate about whether the protagonist of that was himself a replicant. I don't know whether there's a decision on that.
And that theme is developed, if you want to think of it in this way, quite extensively in the second Battlestar Galactica series, which went on for several seasons, in which there are 6, I think, different Cylons who, if you see them individually, appear to be perfectly passable human beings, and but later on, as the story develops, you find out that there are thousands, if not millions, of each of these 6 models, and the illusions of them being human beings is lost because of that. But in the first season especially, they explore this idea of what if there were robots among us, or artificial intelligence walking among us, and we didn't know it, and we couldn't tell what the difference was.
Yeah, I guess that theme of someone or something masquerading as human is also a theme that's gone in a lot of science fiction movies. I'm thinking of the Thing, was that the movie was based on John W. Campbell's story, where the alien can change into human form. and there's perhaps that's the paranoia of that era coming through in that sort of the McCarthy era, which is about when it was written.
Another perfect exemplification of that is Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which many people talk about it as an exemplification of McCarthyist America and the paranoia of being infiltrated by communists. So you've got all these things that are really aliens that people think to be other human beings. They've been taken over, and of course, the Heinlein novel, The Puppet Masters, which was also made into a film, not a very well-known film. It's not a big budget film, but there was a film version of The Puppet Masters, which is the same infiltration of aliens. They're controlling human beings and being their puppet masters, as it were.
Quite literally in that I think, if I didn't see the movie, but I read the novella. I think there's literally a blob of alien life that's on the back of the neck of these people, literally.
Right. Yeah, it extends its tentacles. It extends its tentacles into the spine and in the spinal column to attach into the brain of the host, as it were.
I remember as a child the series Invaders, which I think was in the mid '60s, sometime around the time that the Beatles' Revolver album came out. There was Invaders, which the only way you could tell that they were not human was some indication of on their hands or something like that. My parents didn't let me watch very many of those shows because too violent.
They were too paranoid.
Well, but that was in the middle of the mid '60s UFO flaps, when there were a lot of flying saucers being seen in the skies in the U.S. And so it was perfect for the zeitgeist at the time. And you couldn't tell the invaders from regular people. And the Men in Black are very much like that whole mythos where you have people who look very similar to humans, but are somehow creepily different. Kind of like the uncanny valley between CGI and live action. We have a lot of stories of those kind of people. I don't know if any of them are true, but they've worked their way into our popular culture.
I wonder whether that sort of thing goes back to mythology and legends like that. But I'm not quite pin that sort of down. The idea of the invader who doesn't look different, the threat that's within.
In terms of shape-shifting mythologies, there are several shape-shifting mythologies, which would include the werewolf theme, which is ancient and goes back to at least to ancient Rome. I was surprised. I was listening to set of lectures about Rome. Werewolves were big back then too, and then of course vampires, which aren't necessarily shapeshifters, but they can pass for human beings. And I think you're right, though. I think that there is an archetypal mythology that lies behind the idea of the well, it's a doppelganger. That's the word I'm looking for. Doppelganger is the what's a ringer for a human being, but isn't really a human being, and is therefore a danger for their ability to pass as human.
I finally made it back in.
Oh, we welcome Patrick.
It wouldn't let me back in. It was.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're on
a little quotation mark.
Okay. Well, we're on air at the moment, Patrick. So we'll keep going. I'm thinking about this idea of the doppelganger or the hidden threat now in terms of the science fiction, more science fictional sense of the robots. Again, this business of a robot who you can't tell is not human. And as you say, there's that whole uncanny valley thing. But if we get to the point where an android or an artificial human is indistinguishable from a human being, then we're back to the same sort of theme again.
Well, in Star Trek Next Generation, they actually had the good android Data and then his doppelganger evil brother Lore, who you could not distinguish between them, and Lore would pass himself off for his nefarious plans.
His good brother, yeah. Yeah, well, but it's almost as if Data was played by a human actor. And on Ex Machina, they also had a human actor playing the robot girl, right?
The thing I liked about Ex Machina in that sense was that when you first see the robot, in fact, almost entirely through the entire movie, I forget the name of the robot, but she's so obviously artificial all the way through in everything except her face, and yet you do feel the need to make her to think of her as human. So it's really just the face, but you actually literally hear her gears move. I thought that was very clever in that movie.
Yeah,
you can literally hear her whir as she moves around. So there's never any doubt that she's artificial. And yet, when the protagonist talks to her, he's falling in love with her and being continually trying to convince himself that she's human.
That's good acting and good directing.
It was
good editing.
Very good in that.
Yeah.
That boundary is also tested in Steven Spielberg's AI, where some of the robots are very the little boy who's is the main character, he becomes indistinguishable from a human being, but a lot of the robots are not indistinguishable and are kept different and apart because of that.
It's interesting.
I would say that was good writing on the Ex Machina. It was a good story, and so was AI. Actually, I have that one.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, I suppose, as we move into the future, whether we will want to build humanoid robots. I mean, do we need to really? The premise of a lot of Isaac Asimov's stories about of course, he was the expert on writing stories about robots for a long while. The premise that you would create these humanoid robots, even though they weren't perfectly like humans, they were obviously not human, but at least they had human shape. And the premise for that was that we already have so much equipment, vehicles to drive, forklifts to operate, factories which currently require human pulling of levers and so on, that it was easier to build something humanoid like that could operate all that equipment. But I don't know that that's the way things are actually going. It's not the way that robots actually went in factories.
I would agree with the factory, and I also agree that the justification for making a humanoid automaton is not convenience of the environment, because even we're probably not optimized for our current environment. But what does drive this currently, and I can't remember the name of the film, but I think the thing that will continue to drive this design aesthetic is that it makes it easier for us to attach to and relate to this machine. So, and the film that I was thinking of in particular, which has actually now been kind of occurred in the real world, which is having these little android helpers for the elderly. So it's a lot easier for them to relate to this thing that does not look scary.
It's a Japanese thing, isn't it? The sort of the use of those little humanoid.
Yeah, Akibo. I guess Akibo was the dog, but
they've gotten very sophisticated at making human-looking robots. The ones we've seen so far are not the most advanced. They
don't want them looking too human though, because they start to affect people. Get a creepy effect off of them.
Well, that's the uncanny valley. That's the uncanny valley. But what if you come up the other side of the uncanny valley and you're not creepy anymore?
Well, I still think
Doctor Who had his canine.
No, that's not the uncanny valley, Patrick.
Look at the Lego movies. I mean, people respond very well to cute, idealized features. And
anime invented that decades ago, long before there were any Lego movies.
Well, it's simple and it's cheap, and that's the same reason it could work for robots, is because it's simple and cheap to build something that's cute and different, but it's very difficult to get something that's close enough to human that it crosses to the other side of the uncanny valley, especially when it comes to movement. Audio animatronic figures. We like to think that they look really realistic, but when you actually compare them to an actual person, they're not. I once saw a comic who pretended to be an audio animatronic figure, and it was quite funny because you immediately realize that these movements aren't realistic at all. They're just aping, realistic human movement.
Well, but Pixar realized that 20 years ago. They realized that they should not try to make their characters look realistically human.
Did you see the animated version of Beowulf?
No.
Okay, there was some debate about whether it should be rated R or not, because it had an Angelina Jolie body that was nude and shown in a spectacular coming up out of a gooey fountain, all wet and slippery, coming out of this fountain by firelight.
You have my attention.
People were like, yeah, that's probably the most memorable scene, I think. But this scene, it's kind of like the scene from Gremlins that led to the creation of the PG-13 rating. But in this one, there were questions like, well, look, how close to a nude scene does it have to be? And the guy who was writing the article said, well, look, I got to tell you, this was close enough to a nude female body for me. And so, but how, it is very similar to the question about child pornography. Should, the Chief Justice very famously said, well, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And they were trying to come up with rules, and they said, well, dramatic portrayals of underage minors involved in sex should be illegal. And so then one of the counselors said, well, so then you're saying that Romeo and Juliet should be illegal. And it didn't quite come out, and we were left with, well, I know it when I see it.
But in the movies, they weren't actually using necessarily actors who were, I suppose, they certainly would be in their teens, I suppose, at least. Depends where you draw the age line, I suppose. But certainly we don't want to see that kind of stuff out there, I don't think. Yeah, I suppose.
You don't want to see Romeo and Juliet, or what?
No, well, I'm trying to.
Well, Romeo and Juliet's not that explicit. I mean,
no.
There's a difference between explicitness and casual, and then the plain. There's just plain.
I don't deny that there's a difference. What I'm saying is the difference is very difficult to define.
You're right. You're right about that.
You didn't let me finish the third thing. Then it's just plain innocent nudity.
Can we move on back onto to the idea that?
Can we just stay on nudity for the next 40 minutes, please?
No, that's not. Can we move on to the idea that if we are going to create, it is actually related. If we are going to move on to creating robots who look very much like humans, and we want to push them beyond the uncanny valley so that they look very much like humans, what is the motivation? And the only motivation I can see is that you want them to become sex toys.
Oh. So you don't think the socialization...
Why do you want a robot to look exactly like a human?
I agree.
Oh, exactly like a human.
The very first thing on their mind, even in movies like Ex Mechanica, or however you pronounce that. It was all about sex. And there's lots of movies like that. They go on forever in sci-fi robotic type things.
But that was the interesting thing in that movie, in Ex Machina, which I really do think is a good movie, is that the creator of those robots was explicitly creating them so that he could have sex.
Yeah,
with
but
them.
he was a billionaire. He could have any woman he wanted. Why did he do that? That's something I never understood about that movie.
Well, I guess it's a matter of control. Like, he utterly owned that object, and it was utterly under his power. So there was this very misogynistic, male power play that he was carrying on there.
Well, that's not necessarily misogynistic. It's just a preference. Somebody might have a preference for that, being in control.
Or there are definitely people who have that.
Or being able to switch her off whenever you want.
Yeah, but that plays into the whole Well, I think it is misogynistic. It's that whole power. It's not about sex. It's about power, which feeds into rape culture and all those things.
But if the situation were exactly reversed, and there were a sex robot for women, and a woman preferred that because she allowed her to be in control, would you call that
misanthropic?
Well, then misanthropic means hating of human beings. It's the term that's specifically
misandrous.
Misandrous. That's the term. Sorry.
Would I think that? I don't know, but I don't think so, because I think the trouble with our culture is that it's been so male dominated for so long that it's impossible simply to flip it in a mirror that way and say, well, if the roles were reversed, would it be okay? I don't think it works that way.
And as far as sex robots are concerned, we all know that there are lots and lots and lots of crazy machines out there for both men and women for sex toys, just browse the porn sites once in a while, and you'll find some.
And
crazy
there have been for many decades.
Decades, I would say from the time man started to carve wood.
Oh, I get it. Carve wood. Okay.
Yeah.
But more like hundreds of years, centuries.
Yes, well, obviously, sex robots take that up another notch.
Is that the way things are going to go? It seems like it's certainly possible.
I think it'll be a major driver.
It will definitely go that way. And the Japanese will take the lead, and they will be great at it.
Why are we able to video chat? I mean, video streaming was pioneered by the porn industry.
Well, a lot of the internet was funded by that, wasn't it? Certainly, the early development of websites was pushed by that. So, which is
well, physics first, with a need to exchange information from particle accelerators, and then pornography second.
Okay,
as the drivers of the internet.
Pornography is orders of magnitude more bandwidth than physics.
Well, I can remember,
and more profitable. Yeah,
I can remember as a
more profitable, but the big accelerators create so much information that's already becoming a major storage problem, and sharing that information takes an enormous bandwidth.
I can remember as a 12-year-old, maybe even 10-year-old, how we used to talk about in the future we're going to have video phone, just like you were talking to somebody on the phone, and it was like a big deal, a big sci-fi thing and everything, and they always had these video phones and like that, and here we are as if it was always there.
It's routine. It's become routine, and it became routine in a way that's a little different from what we expected it, because it came by way of computers and not by way of phone.
Right. It's always a little bit different. But when you think about it, phones are run by computers anyway.
Well, they are now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, phones are computers, let's face it.
Right.
Yeah.
I suppose that's just to spin off a little bit differently. That issue of the future is never quite the way we imagined it was going to be. We sort of imagine what the future is going to be like, and it's always just a little bit different. Or it's
I would say the future is completely defeats our conception of what it's going to be within our own lifetimes.
Of course, I've like probably you have. I've got one of those books that I had as a kid. Sort of the 1960s. In my case, the 1960s of what will the world be like in the year 2000. And I'm still waiting for my flying car. I'm still waiting for the nuclear powered cargo zeppelins.
I'm working on that one for you.
Power too cheap to meter.
Oh, jetpacks.
Jetpacks. That's good. Elimination of all diseases. Yeah.
And now there's a whole industry, a subgenre within science fiction of this, cyberpunk, not cyberpunk, but steampunk and everything after it, where we take earlier technologies and we have permutations of them that
like the golden compass, or what kind of a fantasy as well, but
and
that's hardly steampunk though.
In the end of one of the Back to the Future movies, they have a very steampunk scene where the train rises up off the rails and up into the sky.
That's the second one, isn't it?
No, it's the third one. The end of the third one. Yeah.
My favorite scene from that is when there's this huge monstrosity constructed in the barn, and then the professor comes, it does all this stuff and it's rattling, and you think the thing's going to explode, and it's just huge. And then he comes up to Marty, who has just arrived, in the Old West, and he has a cup, and he says, "Ice." He's like super, absolutely thrilled. He filled this barn with machinery and was able to make an ice cube with it.
That's right.
Another steampunk science fiction film is Wild Wild West.
Yes.
The devices that are created in that are quite
that was originally an old film,
even if the movie was lousy.
That was originally an old TV series, Wild Wild West. I used to watch it all the time as a child.
Yeah, without the steampunk though.
Without the steampunk element. Presumably, I've never seen the television series.
Well, I don't know if it was steampunk or if they even had such a phrase at the time, but it was about the upcoming of certain science breakthroughs and stuff, and the men, the evil guy and the good guys, and it was always, they were always using science to solve problems or whatever, but it was Western, it was like late Western, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was different.
So
anyway, back to science fiction and artificial intelligence.
Yep. Well, where are we going with this?
So many themes. Well, Nick wasn't here when we were discussing. I mean, Nick, when you were talking earlier about some of your themes, I was going to say, I was reading a blog post recently that said something very similar along those lines, and before you arrived, we were talking about The Tempest, and actually, David was doing that, and since I know just about nothing about The Tempest, I'm ashamed to admit I'm much better on Hamlet, but do not, comrade. Well, I can't say dear brother. Okay, do not, dear brother, show me the steep and thorny path to heaven, while he himself the primrose path of dalliance treads.
That's good. Very nice.
The basing of Forbidden Planet on The Tempest is very loose in the extreme, and they haven't even attempted to adopt any of the dialogue or even the characters for that. Well, there's a character insofar as the daughter of Morbius is like the daughter in
Hermione
in The Tempest. Like,
Miranda. Right.
Miranda in The Tempest is
well, Robbie
like
the robot is kind of like.
He's supposed to be like Caliban, but he's also like Ariel as well, isn't he? Really?
Yeah, more like Ariel, I think. Yeah.
Well, he serves several functions, but the basing is very loose, like I said.
Of course, it's loose.
But
yes.
Is there a good modern theatrical Tempest?
There's lots of them. Yeah. Helen Mirren actually did it one of the best that I've seen is Prospera. Is that a Prospero? And Felicity Jones, who recently found stardom in Star Wars movies, was Miranda. Yeah, check that out. It's on Netflix.
Yeah, I saw that. It was pretty good.
Yeah,
it was pretty good.
Well, Helen Mirren's a better actress than most people think, but she's really good.
I thought the theme. I know I came in late because I had trouble getting in, but I thought the theme was going to be something about the accuracy or the real science in science fiction.
Yeah, well, we got diverted. This happens. But,
I think I had.
I was going to mention.
I made an early post about The Passengers.
Well, I was going to make a comment on the first Formic War series where they, and talk about how when you write, of course, David is a lot more qualified to say something to this effect, but than I am, but because I'm no writer. But one of the tricks is to make it believable, even if it's wrong. To make it believable and not ridiculous. So, like the first Formic Wars, the whole 3 series, they didn't even bother trying to pretend that there was such thing as faster than light speed. Even the aliens that came could not reach actual light speed. They called it near light speed travel, and they were using RAM scoops and gamma rays to propel and all this other stuff. It was, in a sense, it was believable. It was, very believable because of the idea that they completely left out the implausible part. They didn't get down with that.
Was it one of your blog posts, Nick, that where you talked about the division, or maybe it was in the pre-discussion, the division between movies about space travel between those that accepted faster than light travel and those that didn't accept faster than light travel, and those are 2 very different constructs for how you go out and explore the universe or build your galactic civilization or whatever. If you take those two different routes, which are quite different, one where you can zip rather quickly to another star system, and those where you actually have to go through the hard yards of spending at least hundreds of years traveling between the stars. And there really, apart from Passengers, there haven't been many movies which have taken the latter route.
The Alien universe.
So some of them are highly ambiguous of where they come down, and a lot of it comes down to how hard the science fiction is. Because in fantasy science fiction like Star Wars and Star Trek, the science is just there in order to provide a setting of people being able to go to exotic worlds and not having to bother with the travel in between them. So when you get an author or a storyteller who does want to bother, and then they start to focus on the technologies that might be used, and you get things like light sails and subluminal velocities, and there's a lot of that as well. A lesser known science fiction film that I thought was actually quite good was based on a less than a slow arc that was going to another star. I can't remember the name of it, but I can Google it and find it out. So there have been quite a few that have focused on that, but it tends to make a very different story than zipping around to other exotic locations when you're focused completely on what goes on inside in an arc over several hundred years.
Yeah.
Pandorum, I think that was the name of it. It was the
That was a horror movie, wasn't it?
Well, it was science fiction horror, but
okay.
It was very much based on a starship going to another star, and and there's a twist at the end, of course. Pandora.
Yeah, I think I saw the poster for that, and I really, I'm not a horror fan. Event Horizon really bothered me.
What bothered you about Event Horizon?
The gore.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
Then we get into a subgenre like science fiction horror, and obviously the most famous in that is Alien. So were you bothered by the gore in Alien?
Not so much.
I'm sorry, wasn't Event Horizon a Disney movie? You sure you got the right?
No.
You're thinking of the Black Hole.
The Black Hole is a
Black
Disney
Hole.
movie with Max von Sydow in it, of all people.
Yeah.
But the Event Horizon was a pretty creepy science fiction horror film.
That was too scary for me.
Yeah, there are some scary moments in Event Horizon. I'll grant you that. But one of the things I'd like to mention that I think is really interesting about the difference between, and it becomes interesting in terms of science fiction horror films, is a difference between the science fiction films and horror films. Because the horror films, a lot of the low budget ones turned out to be really good movies. Just like in film noir, they were B-list movies that were made purposefully to be cheap second features. But there was a whole series of horror movies that were produced by Val Lewton. Many of them were directed by Jacques Tourneur. The Cat People, I Walked with a Zombie, and several others. And they turned out to be really wonderful films from a cinematic standpoint, and people who love movies watch them and enjoy them, not for their camp value, but for their quality. Whereas I think largely in science fiction, the cheap movies tend to be really awful creature features, and there are very few cheap science fiction films that have really high quality dialogue and writing. Recently, I watched on YouTube for free a grindhouse flick from 1966 called Queen of Blood, which actually could have been a really good film with a little bit higher production values and a little better writing and A-list actors. So it was a film that had real potential, but it was cheap, and it remained cheap, so it never got over that threshold. But when Forbidden Planet and This Island Earth were made, they were fairly big budget major productions, and you can see the difference still to this day, I think.
Well, in preparation for this podcast, I went and watched This Island Earth, never having seen it. It was in cited as one of these giants, and I was really impressed.
You were impressed with it?
Yeah, I mean, you could see how much of the techniques and the way that they tell the story, and the we're leaving this planet, and they had I mean, there were things, and to get actually more toward the point of the topic of the podcast in terms of the science, they had things where they showed them going through interstellar space when they really weren't, and they said, well, now we're going through the the heat layer or the radiation layer, and they had the flying saucer that they were traveling in, on fire, and then they were coming in, and they got attacked by the evil opponents that were the evil other aliens that we never saw, which were dropping comets on them, or these flaming meteor things. Their planet was dying, and the thing where I actually had cringing laughter was that they were demonstrating that they were arguing their superiority over what was the name of those aliens that they were with? The
Metalunans.
Yeah.
The planet is Metalunan. Yeah.
Yeah, the Metalunans were, or the Metalunatics were. They were arguing with the leader that the humans were better because our God is bigger.
Yeah.
Well, that's oh no. That I brought attention to that scene in my blog post about it because it's so silly in its context.
I've got to read that blog. And by the way, for anybody who's listening, you got to read Geopolycratus. He's got great material on there, and that's Nick Nielsen, who we're listening to.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, as far as low budget sci-fi is concerned, well, there's two, but I'm not sure if the second one is low budget. The first one was part sci-fi, part horror, and part comedy, and it's called Trancers.
Trancers.
Yes, it was a terrific. I mean, I loved it. And the funny thing is that it was so low budget that I saw this movie like 100 times before my friend pointed out to me that in one of the scenes, they left in the movie a microphone boom hanging in the middle of the camera, and I didn't even see it because I was so into the movie. And my friend pointed it out to me. It was the way they time traveled was to inhabit an ancestor's body. Somehow it had this technique where you would, and in the end, like I said, it's part comedy. And one of the end parts was where Jack Death had to inhabit some ancestor who was a little girl, and she was bossing the. No, it was his. I'm sorry, Jack Death's boss had to inhabit an ancestor that was a little girl, and this little girl's bossing Jack Death around. It was kind of like I said, it's part comedy, part sci-fi, and part horror. I thought that was good. The other one, what I thought was, because you can't scare me by zombies because I know they're not true, but Phantasm. That is the only movie that made me jump when that guy came out and said, "The funeral's about to begin, sir," something like that. Funeral's about to begin. He's a big guy, and they're making these troll-like things to work on some dense planet or something. But
there we go.
But he jumps out of nowhere, and he's really tall. He's like 7 feet tall. Puts his hand on the guy whose brother who died or whatever, and said the funeral's about to begin. But the way he did it startled. I literally jumped out of my seat, and I was watching this thing on a 13-inch color television. Can I imagine if I was watching it in the movies?
I have a theory that every time a new technology comes out, they make a horror science fiction about it. Like the VCR, for the VCR, they made Videodrome. You could probably come up with a number for television. Television really took a long time to be adapted. But there was one for the internet, which was the Ring. There was one for the CD, where the CD was this weapon, and that was Dolph Lundgren as an intergalactic. Dolph Lundgren was a cop, and there was a thing called it was I Come in Peace. So there was a bad guy that Dolph Lundgren, the cop, was after. And
I remember that movie. That was a good movie too. I Come in Peace.
And a lot of it was very funny. And then
go in pieces.
Yeah, I come in peace, and you'll go in pieces. Let's see. Yeah, no. I mean, he's really on a stature there with Shakespeare. And let's see. Anyway, I was pointing this out on a comment in an article I saw online, where they were the article was advocating that virtual murder should be illegal. So you shouldn't be allowed to kill people in virtual environments. And then they had all these reasons. I mean, when I was in junior high or high school, my parents forbid me from playing Dungeons and Dragons because this was this new thing that had come up, and some kid who was into it had killed himself. And so this made headlines. I think he was an MIT student.
Really?
And
I remember those days.
Egbert was his name. No, that's the video game.
I didn't
Something
know
like Egbert.
Another way to put this is that the creation of successive generations of technologies or of games create moral panics that have social consequences. Before the Dungeons and Dragons that Buck was just talking about, there was the moral panic caused by comic books and their tawdry character. And there's a great book about that, but I can't remember the name of it. It's something like and then when I was a child,
pinball machines led to moral decay. Pinball machines
that's true.
Led to moral decay.
Moral panic over pinball machines. When I was a child, there was a moral panic over the monster comic books and the plastic models associated with them, and I was really into that. I had a number of those models that were based on films and comic books, and there was quite a comment at the time of children or young adults, adolescents being driven mad by this material and engaging in horrific crime.
There's nothing new under the sun, though, is there? I mean, there was a moral panic about young women reading novels in the 18th century. So it all comes around again. Can I take another diversion or another stab at this theme? What do we think about the treatment of scientists in SF movies? I'm thinking about the fact that my wife, who's an ex-nurse, who used to be a nurse, every time we see anything on television or on a movie which has something set in a hospital or a doctor's rooms, sits there peeking at all the things that would absolutely not happen. You have an operating theatre and the surgeons are standing around without masks on, or that their masks are below their noses or whatever. So the treatment of medicos and medicine in medical type movies or movies with medical scenes is always very dubious. What do we think about the treatment of scientists in science fiction movies. Is that any better, or is it likely to be a good deal worse? I mean, there's the silly character, the scientific character in Jurassic Park. What's the name of the guy who's a chaotician? Malcolm, yeah. I mean, he's supposed to be a mathematician, but he's the most unlike any mathematician I've seen in a movie.
Yeah, well, it's a real mixed bag, isn't it? I mean, there's a whole suite of mad scientist characters who are pretty awful, and set to take revenge against the whole world for some imagined slight in their past. But there's also quite a range of characters who are nearly heroic in their devotion to science and bettering the world and the human condition.
My favorite is.
There's also.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to take a twist, so go ahead. What you're going to say?
Well, my favorite is Ellie Arrowways, played by Jodie Foster in the film Contact.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
That would probably be a pretty flattering portrayal of the science. What I was going to say about taking scientific heroes in a very different direction is the growth of the gaming industry has created these very large cast of characters and games with lots of participants. Earlier in the evolution, we have the character of Gordon Freeman in the Half-Life series of games.
Yeah.
And he's an action hero. He's not a hero in the sense of being devoted to the betterment of humanity. Gordon Freeman is the guy who's going to single-handedly take on the aliens and defend the planet Earth from them.
But it's as a result of scientific misbehavior, though, isn't it? The fact that the breaches happen to the other worlds in that
in the laboratory. Yes, in the initial scene of the Patrick, it's a video. It's a first-person shooter video game that started with Half-Life, but they made several. It became a franchise, so there were several more that followed it with similar characters overlapping.
The later version. I don't know which version numbers we're up to, but the one that came out about 5 years or so ago, the Half-Life 2 or whatever it was, I thought that was very interestingly done in that, yes, there was a lot of action. There's a lot of action in the play, but the whole thesis of the Earth having been taken over by these aliens, but that there are quisling humans, Dr. Breen, I think the guy's name is, who are collaborating with the aliens to retain power and so on. There's a very chilling scene right at the start of that one, where the protagonist, you're the protagonist because it's a video game rather than a movie. You come out from the train station, and there's these broadcasts of Dr. Breen talking to the populace and explaining to them essentially why they can't have sex anymore. The aliens have taken away the ability for humans to reproduce, and Breen is selling this as a huge benefit to the human race. And that was actually for a video game. I thought that was quite an interesting theme, an interesting approach. It was actually quite chilling, that scene.
Yeah, I think in the Half-Life 2, where you talk, it's a very much a dystopian Earth. Where you're playing the heroic underground people struggling against a totalitarian/fascist system. I think they're riffing a lot on 1984 in that, and not only 1984, but the scene you mentioned where he's coming out of the railway scene. It reminded me a lot of that famous scene from 1984 that was used in the Apple commercial, where there's the Big Brother is on the huge screen and talking down to the people sitting there who are just passively looking up at it. I think that was I assume it was intentional.
Oh, I'm sure it would have been. Yeah. But interesting that was a game rather than a movie, which is perhaps another diversion we could take. But
the gaming industry is now, in terms of dollars, bigger than the movie industry.
Yeah.
It's really big, and people wait for the big releases, and the studios literally spend tens of millions of dollars and have hundreds of people working on these games, and they're very big productions. It's a big
You've only got to actually see the credits list if you ever get to the end of some of these games, and see the credits list roll by, and as you say, there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people.
Yeah, I rely on my son to finish the games, and I watch the credits.
I'm just not sure.
He's 12; he can finish any game ever made. But yeah,
I'm just not sure. I'm trying to think about the question whether or not the scientists are being treated either one way or the other in sci-fi movies, and I'm listening to you guys, and I'm sitting there thinking, and I can't put my finger on any direction.
It's all over the map. I think you can find really, really horrible portrayals of scientists, especially, like I said, the mad scientist archetype who's driven mad by some slight or resentment in his past, and then the heroic scientist, like the somebody mentioned Contact, and the Jodie Foster playing the Jill Tarter.
Yeah.
Or there's also heroic scientists that are incredibly unrealistic, like Indiana Jones, but very entertaining, nevertheless. You know?
Yes, very entertaining. But if you, I can't imagine an archaeologist watching any of the Indiana Jones film. I mean, it drives me up the wall when I see archaeological sites destroyed in films, and the filmmakers seem to love creating these huge sets and then absolutely destroying them. And every Indiana Jones film, they have they completely and utterly destroy an archaeological site.
priceless World Heritage site.
Right, and they destroy it utterly.
Yeah, well, maybe ISIS got the idea from there. Who knows?
I was going to make an ISIS joke. Yeah, totally, all going in the same way there. I think the first really noble portrayal of a scientist, Paul, that I've seen was the guy that Michael Rennie went to visit in The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Right,
yeah.
In the first Day the Earth Stood Still, that scientists are presented in a very favorable light, and especially in comparison to petty, quibbling politicians, and they gather the world scientists together to receive the message from the man from the stars.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting in that light to think about science fiction movies that might be made in the future about our own times. In that, science there's an attempt now to demonize science and to denigrate science, and so that people are all in a great big hoax to pull the wool over people's eyes. Do we see any of that happening in movies? Are we likely to see the wicked climate scientist trying to hoodwink the world in a future movie?
Yes.
The Hollywood set who makes films and television series, they are not on board with that at all. In fact, they're going to do the exact opposite. They're going to present.
Yeah, I think movie writers and producers and general Hollywood in general are educated people. And
look at Sully.
They're not going to stand for the nonsense.
But if you, there was a science fiction series on television, I think it was in the early 80s, called V, about a reptilian invasion of the United States, or maybe the whole world. I don't remember.
Wait, that was fiction? Hold on. Okay.
Last time I checked. But if you want to pull off your face and show us the reptilian beneath, well, I'm all eyes.
V for victory. Yeah.
However, in the earliest episodes of that series, there were some pretty obvious and conscious references to Nazism and into anti-science culture. And this one girl is coming home pushing her bike from the science fair, and she says the other kids called her a dirty scientist and threw things at her. So that theme was very much on show in that series.
Well, just as a side, Paul, it sounds like you and maybe others know about this, but there is this reptoid conspiracy belief that's out there.
It's extremely fringe.
But
well, not if you're a reader of David Icke or a listener.
Yeah, well, David Icke is extremely fringe.
Sleestack.
Sleestack from Land of the Lost.
Yeah, well, apparently Obama was one of the reptiles.
Reptoid.
Reptilians. They tend to call them reptilians.
Yeah, I can't give him that much credit. I think Obama's pretty much from the Choom gang, but from Hawaii.
You've lost me. I need explanation here. What are we talking about?
The Choom.
What are we talking about?
Well,
what's the Choom gang?
He's an ordinary human being. Okay, I'll break it down that way. He and his friends in Hawaii used to hang out and smoke pot a lot. That
sounds human to me.
but not that
So you're
most
saying
other
that
teenagers don't do that as well. But
reptilians can't do that, or
yeah,
you're racist.
He's not a reptilian now. Oh, those Hawaiians, I hate them all. No.
Oh, okay. So
That
you're
was-
not talking down about the reptoids or reptilians.
Oh, the reptoids are my favorite people.
Okay.
They're not people. They're another
Okay, good.
species.
No,
I
actually,
thought you were talking.
my favorite non-existent people. Okay.
I thought you were going to be talking about the rapture.
So,
It wasn't.
so you're expressing your favoritism of the reptilians over the Greys, apparently.
Oh, definitely. And
So you have a problem. You have a problem with the Greys.
I do. They're a bunch of assholes.
Oh, there was a blog post or something I
As
saw
for non-existent
recently. I can't
entities,
remember.
they're assholes.
Somebody wrote a blog post that said the Greys have been framed.
Wait a minute. No,
I should
we
Google
had
it.
Jack Brewer on our show, and we did a
Yeah,
whole
okay.
show about his book.
Yeah, podcast.
It's a book. The Greys have been
Okay.
framed. And Jack Brewer's on our show, and he on this very podcast, and he talked about his book. In
Okay.
which
I
he
had started reading it, but I didn't read the whole book. Didn't even know it was a book, obviously.
it's an entire book which he goes
Yeah.
into depth about a lot of these issues about how the alien abduction phenomenon has been hijacked by certain charlatans,
Mm-hmm.
to they're not even clear there's actually any phenomenon at all, but to the extent that there is one, people have jumped in and made it their life's work to prove that, and they failed to prove that there's any kind of abductions going on, and that's what Jack's book is about. I recommend it. It's a very good look into fringe culture, and not only does he look at the abductions, he looks at things like MK Ultra, the CIA, when the CIA got totally out of control back in the 50s and 60s. That's something.
Was that the LSD stuff or the?
It was LSD and lots of other things. Yeah.
Psychic control.
Men-
manipulation?
Men who
Yeah.
stare at goats.
Exactly. The Manchurian Candidate sort of stuff. Read that. I don't want to think we should go into depth here, but we did go into depth in that episode, and there's even more than we went into there. Jack's an expert on it, and he can lead you down that path if you really want to go deep into that rabbit hole. He knows where it is.
So should we view a film like Close Encounters as a Third Kind as merely a manifestation of this growing interest in gray aliens, or should we view this as a major theater blockbuster film as something?
Well, I think the
that's-
Greys were kind of peripheral to that. I think that
Yeah, but that was a major film that did feature gray-like aliens.
yeah.
Is that merely a symptom, or is that a
The
cause?
physical form was part of the
this-
mythos at that point, but it really actually
Yeah.
didn't become a huge aspect until that film, plus Whitley Strieber's books that came out in the 80s, which
Are
he
those the
played.
communion books?
Yeah, Communion, Transformation. I don't recommend them. People should not read those books, but because I mean, I don't know what's going on with
Are
these
they
Strieber.
purporting to be real?
Oh,
Yes.
Whitley
When
Strieber. These are written as nonfiction books.
The publisher released them
I
as
didn't know that.
nonfiction books, basically to make a splash.
But Whitley Strieber is a
I saw the cover.
horror fantasy writer, and he came
Okay.
out with
I
these
saw the
books.
cover and I assumed it was sci-fi.
Well, no,
The
Whitley
Greys-
Strieber said
Greys
this
are
happened to
portrayed
me.
as really good guys in Stargate.
Yeah, Whitley Strieber came out with these books, a series of 3 books, which all sold very
Mhm.
well. All the Transformation was a ridiculous piece of trash, so I didn't read the 3rd book. But the Communion book was basically, I had been abducted by these gray aliens, and on the cover of it there was a picture of the archetypal gray alien, and it was sold as a nonfiction book. And
Hmm.
Strieber said, not only have I experienced these things, but my wife and son have experienced these things. His young son, he brought him in and said, he's seen this, or he's seen some of this. So, yeah, you can't really say that it's a fiction story, but.
Well, I think you can say that it is a fiction story.
Well, it wasn't intended as fiction. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's just a marketing device. They released the books as nonfiction books to get attention.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's so unethical to bring in like a kid and say, yeah, he was involved in this too.
People exploit their children all the time.
That's true.
That's not new. There's nothing novel about some publicity-seeking jackass exploiting their children for material or gain.
But it was Close Encounters of the Third Kind plus Whitley Strieber that made the gray alien. I mean, it had been kind of floating around in the mythosphere before that, but they made it really extremely popular, and really everybody, when they see every person in the United States, at least, when they see that face, that with the triangular face with the huge eyes and no nose, they know what they're talking. You know what that is. In fact,
have you seen the movie Paul?
No.
Yes.
It's quite good. It riffs off that theme in a very funny way. So one of the main characters of the film is a gray alien who has escaped from Area 51 and ends up having this buddy movie around the United States on an RV with two British science fiction fans. It's quite I enjoyed it. I thought it was funny.
Okay, you got to give me a link to that, because that sounds really fun.
Yeah, it's a comedy sci-fi.
Now, if you go to Albuquerque, New Mexico, or places like that in the Southwest, you will see the gray alien in graffiti. I have pictures of it. I'll show it to you. Just all around, it's so much part of the mythos there.
Well, in Stargate, they continued the theme, but they're short little. I can't remember the name of the species.
Right.
Yes, in Stargate, they're really short, and I can't remember the name of the species. I don't even know what letter it starts with, but they did go on with the theme that, with the abduction theme, that these aliens were clones of each other, and they were trying to figure out how to continue their species, and that might sort of play into the I've been abducted by an alien and he did sex experiments on me or something,
The Asgard.
But
the
that
Asgard.
Yes.
That's also related to the point Buck brought up earlier about new technologies inspiring a moral panic. And one of the ways that this moral panic is expressed is a film about cloning, or a film about the new technology that people find distressing and threatening.
Right. Well, I mean, it wasn't a film about. It was, it was a series Stargate after the movie. The series Stargate, they approached it, and then towards the end of the series, they started to understand the Asgard to be of that nature.
But I don't suppose there's any surprise, really, that novels and films take new technologies, and the first impulse is to fear them or to worry about their consequences. Sometimes that's valid, and sometimes it isn't, I guess. But it's I guess an understandable human impulse if something new comes along to sort of worry a bit about it, have a bit of a panic about it.
What about
under certain social?
So what about I, Robot, though, which is way ahead of its time, right?
The movie or the collection of stories?
Well, the short stories. Forget the movie. The movie was
well, there you are.
I liked it.
Asimov came along and took a different direction with robot stories, because prior to then, every robot in a story turned out to go on a rampage and be evil. It wasn't until Asimov, with a bit of prodding from John W. Campbell, came up with these 3 laws that constrained the stories by saying, well, these robots are going to be under some constraint that doesn't let them harm human beings. Now let's see where the story goes from there. So,
or through inaction, allow a human to be harmed.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there were through the 3 laws, but it was by imposing those constraints that you suddenly were able to have more interesting stories about robots. But prior to that, there wasn't a panic about what artificial humans would be like. I mean, going all the way back to Frankenstein, of course. You create some sort of something that looks like a human being, but isn't a human being, then it's going to be necessarily evil and try to kill real humans. That's the theme going all the way back to Mary Shelley's novel.
Yeah.
We haven't done with it yet.
Not to reflect back too much. It just occurred to me that the original question about how the scientists are portrayed. I forgot. In the Star Trek series, especially the later ones, scientists and engineers are not only portrayed as the but they are revered.
Yeah, I agree.
But that may be misleading too. There are scientists who are who don't have our best interest in heart.
Well, I mean,
because
they're both.
Because
there are those bad scientists who try to make the wrong directions and stuff. But generally speaking, they are portrayed in the engineers too, like Valana Torres, for example, the half Klingon. She's like one of the best engineers ever existed. That sort of thing.
a Mary Sue character, but not quite in the case of Valana Torres. There's a whole subgenre of Star Trek fan fiction, and somebody wrote a story once that featured a character called Mary Sue, who was better than everybody else, and was incredibly great. Now this idea of a Mary Sue has become an archetype of characters to avoid in fiction, because you don't want super competent people who are greater than everyone else, because it doesn't really make an interesting story.
Well, right. I mean, she has her flaws. Of course, they all have their flaws, but in general, scientists and engineers are portrayed in the Star Trek series, even the old ones.
In general, but I think that's just because they're there everywhere, and then the Starship Enterprise has a science officer, and Gene Roddenberry was very much a futurist who looked toward a very optimistic future, and he shared that with the golden age of science fiction, which is now we love the pulp magazine covers from the 30s and 40s because they celebrated such a optimistic, outward-reaching, expansionist vision of science fiction, which is now almost everything science fiction is dystopian, and they compete with each other to who can show the worst future for human beings, basically.
I think dystopian.
Is anyone here watching The Expanse?
Yeah, I was just going to bring up The Expanse.
Yes. Okay,
no spoilers.
I saw the first season. I haven't seen the second season yet.
Oh yeah.
I just watched the first episode 2 nights ago
Of the first season.
and
Okay, no spoilers.
And,
I'm
the
into
first
season
season.
2, but let's not. I mean, that's a very complicated. I would like to recommend what's his name? Rhys Davies, the astronomer. He had a
John Rice Davies. Oh no,
No.
that's an actor.
Okay, I'll get that straightened out later. The astronomer
Okay.
who made actually a very cogent comments on the first season that I thought were they were critical, but they were also supportive. So, yeah, I'll leave that for later.
But in the Expanse series, and which is based, of course, on the books by James S.A. Corey, which is a pseudonym. But
it's actually two
the
people,
series,
right? Two people.
It's 2 people, yeah. But you could even though there's some terrible things happening, you'd have to say it wasn't entirely dystopian. It's a vision of the future in which we have expanded into the solar system, and we have created colonies on some of the moons of Jupiter and on some of the asteroids, and are busily sort of there is a sort of magical fusion drive or something which enables the spaceships to generate a lot of power and crank their way across the solar system. But it's generally reasonably realistic, I would have said, in that sense of there being finite distances and there being constraints of orbits that you can change and so on. That in that sense, I think it's a reasonably
Yeah, I mean, I think it is reasonably realistic. Well, I won't say which scene, but there was a scene recently in which a guy's on board the spaceship and they're maneuvering. Every time they maneuver, he has to grab hold of a something to keep himself from getting killed. Right. So they're doing the high G maneuvers, and he's every time they do those, he has to. He almost dies because he's out doing maintenance on part of the ship. So they do make an effort. I'll give them credit for that.
on the that new engine, the guy when he first tested it, you almost die from the G forces.
Now there are practical realities of filming a television series. You have people walking around on the asteroid series. They are not walking in a very low gravity. They're walking like they walk on Earth.
It's very hard to do without an incredible budget.
It's not just a budget limitation. They really couldn't do that. So
no.
I'm just saying.
So they're basically just like Shakespeare when he comes out of King Henry V and says, "Imagine the vast fields of France." He says, "They're saying, imagine this is low gravity." And people
I didn't say that. I'm talking about the fusion engine, the new engine.
Oh,
the acceleration.
Okay. Spoiler.
No, it's not a spoiler.
Not a spoiler.
The acceleration was so hard that you can actually die if you stay on that acceleration so long. That's all I started to say. I don't know what you were talking about.
Well, no, there's an episode where there's a guy out trying to fix something on the spacecraft. He's in zero G, and he's floating around. He's got magnetic boots. But when they hit a high G maneuver, he gets thrown against, the surface, which is very realistic. I mean, that would happen.
Right. I wasn't
the treatment of gravity in some of these movies, or artificial gravity, or the lack of gravity, is an interesting issue in itself. I got very annoyed watching the movie The Martian, the recent movie The Martian. Most of it was okay, but the bits in the mothership where they're supposed to be in this centrifugal ring, which is creating artificial gravity. It's quite obvious that, as you watch the actors, that they're just walking down the slope on the stage set. They're not actually vertical. They're not actually at a normal to the curve of the surface that they're walking on. It's quite obvious that they're just sort of walking on a sloping set.
Yeah, okay.
And if you think about the fact that 40 years ago or more, maybe 50 years ago now, that Kubrick in 2001, you have this brilliant treatment of an artificial gravity ring.
Yeah, well, 2001 was very brilliantly done and very well thought out. But these are very brief scenes where they have...
And the video phones turned out exactly like he said.
Well, yeah.
Not only that, but the monkeys beating each other to death with sticks.
Yeah, that's pretty.
Oh man,
we
ended up doing that too. So
that is still the greatest SF movie ever made, I think. Would you agree? Descent?
I mean, it was, for its time. It was. It doesn't look dated. You look at the effects. And you go, wow, somebody really put a lot of thought and effort into these effects. And
the pacing is not something we would typically tolerate today, though.
No, but I'm okay with that myself.
No, it's lovely.
But if you can watch a 3-hour Chinese movie, you can certainly watch a 3-hour.
Anything by Kurosawa will have one camera shot for like 10 minutes, which is beautiful and works very well. That we're just impatient. We're ADHD culture.
So just real quick digression. What's your favorite Kurosawa movie?
Boy, that's a tough one. I don't have the Seven Samurai is absolutely beautiful and perfect. But I really like Ron as well. Ron is kind of Macbeth meets King Lear, but it's beautiful as well. But Seven Samurai.
Any other Kurosawa fans?
I haven't seen many of the movies. I've seen Seven Samurai.
I've seen Rashomon.
What's the one of? Is it Rashomon? Is that another one of his?
Rashomon is brilliant. Yeah, I recommend that. Another good black and white
Blind Swordsman. Yeah.
Yeah, the Blind
Swordsman was like that scene from Star Wars where Luke
Hidden Fortress became Star Wars. Hidden Fortress was George Lucas's
homage,
just like Seven Samurai became
inspiration,
became the Magnificent Seven. Hidden Fortress became Star Wars 1. Yeah.
Anyway, I want to second your vote for Ron.
Ron is one of the most beautiful colored movies you'll ever see.
It's kind of like heavy metal in that you could take any frame from the movie and blow it up into a poster. It would be fantastic.
Yeah, Kurosawa had that kind of visual talent.
Genius.
He saw the movie before it became the movie.
Has anyone seen Dark City? Which is, I think, made.
Oh yeah, that I hadn't even thought of that with tuning.
Yes, yeah. But I had the DVD with Roger Ebert's commentary track.
Commentary. Mm-hmm.
And he basically gets you to stop and start and say, just walk through this next little clip, this next little scene. And he points out some very clever things. That's a movie I like a lot, is Dark City.
Yeah, that really underappreciated, I think.
I mean, there's some sort of the aliens are a bit hokey, but the original concept, I think, is clever. And certainly the start of it. Certainly, if you look at the director's cut rather than the commercially released version, the start of it is just lyrical, really. It's where everything grinds to a halt at midnight. All the cars stop moving on the roads, and everybody slumps over in their seats.
That's not.
It is. The thing which is in the commercial version, which spoiled it, was there's a little explanation bit at the start where where the doctor explains that what the aliens are doing.
Yeah, I hated that.
Gives it all away.
Yeah, I hated that.
And if you leave that out.
I thought there were, it seems to me like there's so many movies where the longer version is just better. Alien, the second movie, Aliens, where you actually see LV-426.
Aliens was improved by the additional footage, definitely.
And in the third one, you actually get to see that the alien that emerges. That the larva form of the alien that emerges from its host has integrated host DNA, and so. I think in the regular version of Alien 3 that most people saw, they didn't see the infected dog.
Isn't an Alien 3? Isn't the theater version a dog alien, and the director's cut version comes out of a cow or a steer or something like that?
I don't know about that.
I'd have to watch it again to make sure, but I think it was quite different.
Okay, because I recall I don't recall. Are we talking about in the same place? This was on a penal colony?
Yeah. It's number 3. We're taking place in the penal colony, where the Ripley has crash landed, and she's of course worried that she might have an alien in her, or she might have brought one with her.
Where do we think this cow is?
On the planet, on the penal colony planet. My memory is imprecise, so I'm not swearing by it. I recall that it was quite different than the movie version. The theatrical version was quite different than the director cut version.
Did you ever read a prototype script that was circulating about 2 years before Alien 3 came out?
No, I know nothing about it.
Okay, because there was a prototype script that was out that had the it was like an early Alien versus Predator, and it was that the Predators were putting these alien eggs around to infest a buffalo-like creature.
I don't know that.
Okay. Anyway, that there were a number of parts of that screenplay that made it into the one with the where they went to the Antarctic station, temple under the ice.
Yeah, that was one of the. I would think that was the first of the 2 Alien versus Predator films.
Okay. I thought that I didn't like the shifting hallways and the to me, they had this, kind of Deus ex machina where their environment would change and it would, it would just sort of like randomly happen where the situation would change to create these crises.
I think that's a feedback into the film industry from gaming, because that's exactly what you encounter in a gaming environment, is that things change around you very rapidly, and you can find yourself thrust into new circumstances suddenly.
Yeah. Well, I liked it up to that point, but then I felt like, well, there's no, there, it was just too random for me, where anything could change at any time, and so I thought, well, why should I get invested in this particular dilemma? Their entire environment's going to change, and then it's going to change again, and I said, well, okay, they lost me because it's kind of like the dream. They
those
use
were
the dream more.
Those were particularly schlocky sequels, whereas I liked the sequel that was done on the Alien Game Reserve planet. They pick up the aliens film where they're taken and dropped onto this planet, and they have to fight their way against the aliens to survive.
How many are there in the full series? Leaving aside the Alien versus Predator thing stuff, is it 4 in the main series?
There's three films in the Predator, and then there's the 2 offshoots that involve Alien versus Predator. So 5 if you include those 2.
So how many movies involve Ripley as the character?
That's the Alien franchise. So there's 4.
That's what I'm asking. Yeah, 4 of those.
4 in the Alien franchise, and then like 2 crossovers with the Predator alien.
I have to confess not to have seen Alien 3 and Alien 4.
Well, but of course, then the other Alien sequel that came out a few years back in 2012, but that doesn't have Ripley in it.
No.
And I recently read an interview with Ridley Scott that said he had his hands back on the franchise. He was never going to let it go again, and he had plans to produce a lot of additional Alien films.
Sounds a bit like George Lucas and Star Wars to me.
Yeah,
but still, I mean, Ridley Scott has got a good track record in some movies. I mean, certainly Blade Runner, for example, which we've talked about, which we didn't spend much time talking about.
Yeah, Blade Runner was made the impact because of its film noir style texture and the film. Another science fiction film I think was another perfect example of the first film being good and the subsequent ones not being so good. Pitch Black was a great science fiction horror film, and that was kept very simple, very focused, and it was a great film. And the second one was just beyond awful, and the third one was starting to get better again. But what's the other science fiction trilogy I'm thinking of? The first one was just great. Well, The Matrix. The Matrix, the first film, once again, was very focused and a great film. Once again, a film in which they expressed the moral panic of the internet and what could be involved.
I'm sorry, was Blade Runner the one with Harrison Ford?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That is Philip K. Dick's Do Android Dream of Electric Sheep?
Yeah, it is. But to pick up on what Nick's saying about the Matrix, the first Matrix movie was pretty good, but I couldn't not watch the second one.
Yeah, the second two were really awful. They were just they took a whole bunch of money and they threw it at the problem, and it didn't make it better. So
it's terrible. But going back to Patrick, the Blade Runner, I believe there is a Blade Runner sequel in production. Is that right?
I believe there is. Yeah. I did want to address Paul's question about whether or not Decker was a replicant, and that was your question?
That was my question. But go on.
Yeah, it's pretty clear he was, and this actually speaks to what was the AI Ex Machina? I expected the lottery winner software developer to be an android.
No, did you? Okay, no, I didn't get that thought.
I was actually shocked when the end credits rolled and they didn't have him turn out to be or give any clue that he was actually like version 3.
It is interesting that you say that, though, because of course there's a scene in that where he wonders, where the protagonist himself wonders if he's a replicant or a robot. You remember when he cuts open his arm? Do you remember that scene in Ex Machina? He actually cuts into his arm with blood everywhere, trying to see if there's
Okay.
metal gears beneath it.
Oh, well, before the movie came out, I was saying, I don't even want to watch this movie because I know what they're going to do. This guy's going to come in and he's going to turn out to be one, and that'll be the trick.
But it is interesting you say that, because obviously it occurs to the protagonist in it. But it's a very good movie. I do recommend.
Yeah, the one of the clues, if you ever go back and watch Blade Runner, the clues that they leave are actually things that are physically dropped on screen. It's the origami that James Olmos leaves, where and this happens throughout the movie, where when Decker first gets called in by Olmos, Olmos is sitting there folding the paper while the police chief is threatening Decker, and Decker saying, "Look, I was quit when I came in. I'm twice as quit now." And then the chief continues threatening him, and then says kind of like a code phrase, which is "You're little people. You're not cop. You're little people." And then almost takes a little origami chicken and then sets it down on the table. Then later he leaves he has a little matchstick man, and then after he spends the night with Rachel, almost he's sleeping, he's dreaming of a unicorn, and almost is in the area, and he makes a little origami unicorn. Mm-hmm. And so almost was aware of this programming that he had, and was representing this leaving these little clues that Decker's behavior was kind of programmed.
It's not unusual, though, for a movie to leave issues like this hanging unresolved for the later contemplation of the audience. I'm thinking of the end of Inception, for example, where you're never quite sure whether the protagonist has gotten back to reality, or the end of Total Recall, at least the story that Total Recall is based on, where you never actually know whether someone's come out of these depths of dreams to the top level. There's in fact no way of knowing anymore. So,
well, the dream sequence is like my least favorite trick. I think it's used by lazy writers. It's kind of like when you're not sure how to make your scene seem more intense, you start throwing a lot of profanity into the dialogue. And I heard a writer, and I really loved him for saying this. He said, whenever you don't know how to introduce a topic, the dream sequence is the first pain reliever you reach for.
Yeah.
And I really love that because and so for me, I just could not get involved in Inception again because there are no rules. It's they enforce whatever rules they want to enforce at that time. It's a dream. It's kind of like where the antagonist is crazy, and like the Joker. Well, why does he do that? Why does he do all this stuff? Well, because he's crazy, and crazy people just don't make any sense.
Let me ask you something. Was Ex Machina made after a book or short story, or was it written?
No, I think it was an original screenplay.
Original screenplay, because I find you mentioned Total Recall, which is another Phillip K. Dick story. I find that short stories make great movies, but that doesn't necessarily mean that good writing makes for a great movie, because the movie maker has to be good as well. Yeah. Total Recall was ridiculous when it comes. You ask about portraying science accurately. It was crazy.
Oh, that was a pretty poor movie, actually. But yeah, but it's true.
Yeah,
It's true that
was,
short stories often make the best
Arnold
movies.
Schwarzenegger's face is blowing up, and then the air pressure comes in, and all of a sudden he's okay. I don't think so.
No,
That's
it's
but
bullshit. Yeah,
yeah, that was we can remember it for you wholesale.
yeah, that's right. That was the short story. Yeah, yeah. Okay, are we going to wind this up, folks? Do you have recommendations in mind? I've got a recommendation that I can make. Are we happy to wind up now, or are we done? Any bids?
This
All
sounds
right.
like a good time.
We're nearly up to the 2 hours. Okay, my recommendation is, as always, a book. And this is an interesting one, actually, in that it's not a science book or not a science fiction book. It's called Bound to Please, B-O-U-N-D, Bound to Please, by Michael Dirda. And it's a collection of book reviews. And you would think, oh, yeah, ho-hum. But he's such a good writer, and he introduces and talks about the books so well. But even books that you've never read, ones that you're never going to read, he still writes very entertainingly about them. So and then if he writes about books that you're familiar with, it's very interesting what he has to say. And he certainly is a writer who's someone who's read incredible range of books. And he's familiar with not only the classics in other languages, but with comic books, with modern science fiction, with Terry Pratchett. So he's a great writer. So I really recommend that. It's called Bound to Please by Michael Dirda. Buck, do you have any recommendations? Could be anything.
Well, the thing that I've been referencing probably most recently in some of the science discussions is Nancy Nersession's book. It's not particularly new. It's called Creating Scientific Concepts. It addresses how hypotheses are formed, how the ordinary mental processes that we all use are utilized and extended within the scientific enterprise.
Very good. Okay, Nick, do you have a recommendation?
I would like to I would like to recommend a series of 48 lectures by Bob Hazen that is part of the Origin and Evolution of Earth from the Big Bang to the Future of Human Existence, in which he goes on at quite some detail about what he calls mineral evolution and how the coevolution of the biosphere and the geosphere. It probably would be a bit tedious for some people, but this is the second time. I'm just finishing up listening to this for the second time, all 48 lectures, and it's really great stuff, and there's a lot to be learned there.
Sounds good. Paul, do you have any recommendations?
I have. Oh,
I see it. No, Paul,
sorry.
You need to unmute your
Yeah,
mic.
okay. I have many, but I'll stick to one because that's the rule here. The one I'm going to recommend tonight is, and this is primarily a U.S. recommendation. If you're international, I apologize, but it's the So to Speak podcast, which is a free speech podcast. Free speech is actually a hot issue now in the U.S. There's a nonpartisan group called the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, or FIRE, and they have a podcast called So to Speak. And the issues are largely focused on what's going on in college campuses right now, but it also has larger implications for all of U.S. society. I think of the larger world society as well. People are very concerned about speech that might harm people, but balanced against that is the need to consider all viewpoints. And so to speak, a podcast by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education.
Terrific, thanks. Patrick, do you have a recommendation to hand?
Yeah, sure. Since we were talking about Philip K. Dick, it just so happens I have, all of which were bought later, so I guess they're from a different publishing, they're a little larger, of the collected stories of Philip K. Dick.
Okay.
And there's, of course, one of them showing Total Recall, which was, that movie we can remember for your wholesale. But one of the stories in these books, and I'm not sure which one it's in, is a story that nobody ever really heard of, and I heard it on what used to be a show from Jim Freund at 7 o'clock in the morning, or 6 o'clock in the morning, called The Hour of the Wolf, and he read The Electric Ant by Philip K. Dick.
Okay.
That was, since that's relevant to our android story, humanoid. The electric ant is actually an android. So.
Okay. The Library of America, is it the Library of America? I think also has a 3-volume collection of Philip K. Dick's novels, which is worth having, which I own too. All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been fun having you all. I hope I haven't made too much of a mess of it all hosting. I hope to do it again sometime. So it's good night for me. Buckfield, want to say goodbye?
Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah.
And you did a great job.
Oh, thank you very much. Nick Nielsen?
Thanks for hosting, and thanks for having me on.
That's all right. Patrick?
Thank you, and you did a great job. It was me who couldn't seem to get back in for some reason for a few minutes. I finally got back.
That's okay. Paul Carr, the normal host of this podcast and creator.
David, I'm very grateful to you for taking this on, and thank you.
Good. Thanks. I will do it again when I'm a bit more practiced at it. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. This has been the Unseen Podcast. It's unscripted, unedited, uncensored, whatever Paul normally says at this point. And so it's good night from me and good night from all of us. Thank you very much for joining us.